Trust and Will is an online estate planning service. Visit trustandwill.com for details.
Ooh, Trust and Will.
My dad and I were always close, but some things we just didn't talk about, like his will. After he was gone, we found out he didn't have one, and it created a lot of stress during a time of grief.
Creating a will can be hard to think about, but avoiding it can lead to greater difficulty for the people you love. That's why Trust and Will makes estate planning simple. Create a will online in as little as 30 minutes.
Now, I have a will in place to make sure my loved ones are protected. With Trust and Will, it was easy and affordable, and I got peace of mind knowing my wishes are clear.
Trust and Will.
Get 20% off when you visit trustandwill.com/future. That's trustandwill.com/future to get 20% off. trustandwill.com/FUTURE.
This episode discusses unidentified persons cases, sometimes referred to as UHR, or unidentified human remains. This episode also discusses drug use and crime scenes, so listener discretion is advised. We've included links to the pertinent episodes mentioned in the updates in our show notes. This is The Fall Line. We've been covering John and Jane Doe cases on The Fall Line since Season 4, when we covered 3 cases: Dennis Doe, Christmas Doe, also known as Ware County Jane Doe, and Julie Doe. At that time, all 3 victims had been unidentified for decades. We've given you longer updates on Dennis Doe and Christmas Doe in previous episodes, but as a reminder, the child known as Dennis Doe was found in DeKalb County, Georgia in 1999, and as we reported in 2022, he was identified as 6-year-old William Deshaun Hamilton after a former neighbor recognized forensic art developed in his case. His mother, Teresa Ann Black, was arrested on multiple charges, including felony murder. There has been an update regarding her court case. Per DeKalb County press release, Black was acquitted on charges of felony murder, cruelty to children, and aggravated assault. Black was, however, found, quote, guilty of concealing the death of another in connection with the death of her 6-year-old son, William Deshaun Hamilton. She was sentenced to, quote, 10 years in prison, the maximum allowed under Georgia law for that count. Black told investigators that William had been sick for days before he passed away. Christmas Jane Doe was discovered in a rural area of Ware County, Georgia, in December of 1988. Though long thought to be a toddler, she was identified in 2023 as 5-year-old Kenyatta Kiki Odom. Kenyatta was identified via FIGG, Forensic Investigative Genetic Genealogy. Per WALB, her mother, Evelyn Odom, and her mother's former boyfriend, Ulysses Sanders, were arrested on murder charges in 2023, and the latest reporting that we found was from June of 2024, when the two were still awaiting a trial date. The final case we covered in Season 4 was that of Julie Doe. She's a woman whose remains were found in Florida in 1988. Her case gained national attention in 2015 when an anthropologist realized during reanalysis that she may have been transgender, not cisgender as originally assumed. DNA testing confirmed this, and the DNA Doe Project began work on identifying Julie Doe just a few years later. Her case was also one of the earliest projects of the Trans Doe Task Force, and how we began our work with both organizations. Julie's case was incredibly complex due to endogamy. You'll recall that means intermarriage within a community, such as a small town, that can create confusing family trees, and due to adoption. But in March of 2025, the DNA Doe Project was finally able to announce that Julie Doe had been identified as Pamela Lee Walton of Lexington, Kentucky. Per the Orlando Sentinel, Pamela Walton, quote, had a falling out with her adoptive family in the mid-'80s over an alleged theft from a family member. She'd lost contact with them, and they never reported her missing. Pamela's cause and manner of death are undetermined, but based on where she was found and the context of the situation, authorities have always viewed her case as a likely homicide. Now they're trying to find Pamela's friends and who she was spending time with in the late 1980s. People who can provide photos and stories and more information about her time in Florida, since it's become clear that she was not in the state for very long. If you're uncomfortable reaching out to law enforcement and you have information about Pamela's life, you can contact the Transdo Task Force. There's a link in our show notes for this episode. It is incredible that Pamela has been identified, but her case is not over, and we hope authorities will be able to find out what happened and that the investigation truly continues. So, Season 4 was the start of our Doe coverage, but it's certainly not been the end. Since then, we have covered dozens of unidentified victims across the United States. We've been able to announce a few identifications in previous episodes, like that of the Jenkins County Jane Doe in Georgia, now known as Chong-Un Kim, and the Richland County Jane Doe in South Carolina, who was identified as Virginia Higgins. Last year, we featured what were then all of Metro Nashville Police Department's unidentified victims. First in our standalone episodes on Leo Jane Doe and Cheryl or Sherry Jane Doe, also known as Harpeth Jane Doe. And then an entire season devoted to the department's cold cases. Today, we're bringing you updates on a number of solves and developments from Detective Matthew Filter, who we've been working with for the past 2 years. Your tips, DNA uploads, and social media shares have been incredibly useful in these cases, and our hope is that hearing these stories will show the positive effect that we all have in reconnecting victims with their identities. Many of the cases were solved through FIGG, but not all. Social media and the traditional media have played their parts too. Unidentified persons remain critically undercovered in the media, so anything you can do might just be the step that can help resolve a cold case. One of the first Doe cases we covered with Metro Nashville PD was Leo Jane Doe, also known as Cumberland River Jane Doe. We released an episode on her case in March of 2023, along with an episode on the victim known as Cheryl Jane Doe, also known as Sherry or Sherry Jane Doe or Harpeth River Jane Doe. We'll give you an update on her case later in the episode. Leo Jane Doe was a homicide victim who was recovered from the Cumberland River in March of 1998. She was then described as a middle-aged white female with light brown or blondish hair who wore a distinctive gold medallion necklace, a Leo astrological symbol with Leo, July 24th to August 23rd, printed on the medal. It was the best key that investigators had to her identity, and when we first covered her case, investigators had some leads, but her genealogy had stalled out in Alabama. Since then, the victim has been identified, though her homicide case still remains open. Since we began working with you to cover Metro Nashville's missing and unidentified persons, there have been a number of solves in cases that we've previously covered. And one of the first cases we covered with you was a victim previously known as Leo Jane Doe. Can you update us on her case resolution?
I believe when we first talked about this case, it was in the process of genealogy research. And the research had kind of stalled out because the amount of endogamy. After the story aired, you had referred me to Karen Binder. In fact, I think you interviewed Karen for the episode. She was with the DNA Doe Project at the time. Karen and I discussed the case and what the hangup was trying to build this woman's tree out. She gave me a rundown on how DNA Doe Project would approach the case with a team effort and said they had been successful with similar cases in the past. So with having nothing to lose, I handed the case to them in May of 2023. By August of 2023, I got an email from Karen saying they believe they've identified this UHR and wanted to schedule a Zoom call with me. Now I'm thinking, wow, it's only been 3 months and they have a potential identity on this woman already. She had a presentation she was going to show me to give me some visual aids so I could better understand what she was talking about. Well, I wanted to schedule this Zoom call ASAP, but that week, my sergeant and I were in California following up on leads related to 3 different cases. And we were basically traveling the whole state of California that week. We had leads that took us north of Sacramento, San Francisco, Riverside, West Hollywood, San Diego, and we even made a trip out to Yuma, Arizona. So we were some traveling fools that week, and I didn't want to wait to do the Zoom call. So I explained to Karen what I had going on, and we picked a time to do the call. And well, I was going to make it work one way or the other. So here I am with my sergeant. We are driving through Los Angeles during rush hour. I thought Nashville traffic was bad. I've even driven through Atlanta rush hour traffic, and it didn't compare to the hell we were in. So here I am. I've got a mobile hotspot going on my laptop, fired up, sitting in the passenger seat, keeping my fingers crossed I don't lose the connection and the horns and cussing doesn't give too much of a distraction. And Karen starts her presentation and tells me they believe the UHR is a woman named Diane Miner. She gave me some background on her and identified 2 living daughters. I'm thinking, this is awesome. The only thing that sucked was it was going to be about 5 days before I would be back in Nashville and able to seriously pursue these leads. But nonetheless, I was excited about it and looked forward to getting her identity confirmed. The genealogist that originally started on the case had been on the right track from the start. Diane was from southern Alabama originally, but had moved to Tennessee as a child. Her birthday was July 31st, which matched the zodiac symbol Leo that she was named after. She was a frequent beauty pageant competitor and was trying to break into the music business. At one point, she did sign with Wilburn Brothers Studio and recorded under Mercury Records. She released 1 album that I'm aware of. She married a songwriter and producer and had 2 daughters. She was a vocalist and weather girl on the Stu Phillips Show on Nashville Channel 8. So at one time, she was a fairly well-known person in Nashville. She was last known to be a human resource manager at David Kidd Booksellers and a manager of the Second Story Cafe in downtown Nashville. She was 54 years old when she died. I tracked down both the daughters and was able to obtain DNA samples from them, which did confirm that the UHR was Diane Miner. The daughters were semi-estranged from their mother due to some internal family issues. One of the daughters did try to keep tabs on her, and when she had completely disappeared, did try to find her. They believed she had either moved to Alabama or Florida, but never was able to verify it. I do have a person of interest in her murder, but I can't discuss any further details about the case right now. One thing listeners could help me with is if there is anyone out there that knew Diane Miner, especially associated with her in the 1990s, I'd like to talk to them just to get a better idea of who she was associating with, possibly even dating, because she had been divorced already at that time, or any other personal information that they might be able to share about their relationship with her.
As we said, we covered another Jane Doe victim who'd been recovered from a river during the same season. The woman variously known as Harpeth River Jane Doe or Sherry or Cheryl Jane Doe. There's some reason to believe that Sherry or Cheryl could have been her real name. We told you about her case in a dedicated episode, but we'll recap some of that here. In March of 1976, a fisherman discovered the body of a young woman caught up against a tree in the Harpeth River in Nashville, not far from a bridge at McCrory Lane. Per the Tennessean, the young woman was found face down in about 3 feet of water. She was thought to have drowned and had a high level of alcohol in her system when she died. Sherry Jane Doe was estimated to be somewhere between 14 and 17 at the time, and she may have been Hispanic or Native American. A key factor in her case was a photo that was found in her pocket. It was of a small child, and there was a phone number and a name written on the back. We got into much more detail regarding that story in our episode, but the basic details are this. The information led investigators to 2 men who said that they'd given the young woman, who they said may have been named Sherry or Cheryl, and her friend a ride. They said that she'd been hitchhiking with that friend and that the photo was a picture of the other woman's son, or so she told the men. The men reported that they'd given the young woman a ride to the I-24 exit at Winchester. They couldn't explain how Sherry Jane Doe had ended up back in Nashville. Her friend was described as a thin, blonde-haired white woman around the same age. Sherry Jane Doe's fingerprints were taken and sent out at the time of her recovery, but, of course, there were no matches. Because she was found so soon after death, her post-mortem photographs captured a good likeness of what she looked like in life, and good records were taken of her teeth, including radiographs and a full chart of dental work that could be compared to a missing person, if a tentative match was found. Because her dentition is fairly unique, we had medical illustrations of her teeth done for distribution in 2023. You can find those drawings on our social media or on Unidentified Wiki. The biggest roadblock in Sherry Doe's case has been the inability to pursue FIGG, and that's due to the loss of cemetery records. Though Metro Nashville PD knows where she's buried, in an indigent cemetery that the city no longer uses, the grave markers were displaced, along with those records. And with so many unidentified, unclaimed, and indigent burials in one area, there's simply no way to approach the project, at least not right now. That has been particularly frustrating since a woman has approached the department with information indicating that she may be Sherry Doe's daughter.
The information that she provides is great information, and it really sounds promising. It really sounds like this could very well be her mother, just based on the descriptors, but there's just no way for us to confirm it because we don't have any dental charts. We don't have any DNA. We just don't have anything that we can actually do a comparison on.
But there is a possible lead that Detective Filter discussed with us, one that might connect Sherry Jane Doe to a victim discovered in Kentucky.
There was a girl that was found on the side of the road in Crittenden, Kentucky, which is Grant County. She was found on April 17th of 1976. When she was found, this would have been about 3 weeks after the Harpeth River Jane Doe was found in Nashville. Based on her PMI, the medical examiner estimated she had been deceased about 3 weeks. Now, Crittenden, Kentucky is only about 4 hours away from Nashville. She really fit the physical descriptors of the female white that was seen with the Harpeth River Doe. She is actually listed in NamUs under UP 6711. Kentucky State Police are the ones that are the lead investigators on her case. The problem that Kentucky State Police have is the same as ours, is they know what cemetery she's buried in, but they don't know where. One advantage that they do have, though, is that there is an older gentleman, I think, up around Grant County that used to bury people in that cemetery and kind of remembers this girl's case. So they have at least have a general idea of where in the cemetery she's supposedly buried. It's just kind of a matter of trying to find the specific grave. But that's probably the biggest lead that we've gotten on the Harpeth River Doe case since we did our original story. Another thing that I had done is one of the men that originally had picked up the two girls and drove them to Winchester, Tennessee, is still alive. And I went out and actually re-interviewed him. It would have been early last year, I think in April 2024. And I took the forensic rendering that Kentucky had of this other girl and showed it to him, to see if he would recognize her. And he actually said that the image, it did favor her. Now, he couldn't say with 100% certainty that that's the same girl, but he said that it definitely did favor the girl that was with her. So it is an interesting development, because even if we can identify the other girl and figure out where she's from, that might help lead us to the Harpeth River Doe's family location and where she originated from as well.
In our season fully dedicated to Nashville's unidentified, titled Tennessee Does, we covered 22 of Metro Nashville's cold cases. Detective Filter is now able to offer us a number of updates, including solves and further developments in the search for the identities of victims whom our listeners have worked to keep in the public eye. One of those cases that attracted the most concern and attention from our listeners was a victim best known as Vandy Jane Doe, a young woman whose body was discovered 6.5 years ago. Though the cause of her death is still undetermined, it was clear her remains had been hidden. Based on the drugs in her system, one hypothesis was that she'd overdosed and that she was left to die rather than given the medical attention that she needed. Though that's just one scenario. Here's a little of what we told you when we released our episode on her case. Vandy Jane Doe was discovered on Saturday, September 8, 2018, along Sulphur Creek Road in northwest Davidson County. If you're from Tennessee, that nickname, Vandy, it might already make sense. It's short for Vanderbilt, as in Vanderbilt University. As investigators began to assess the scene, one detail that was immediately apparent was that the victim had been dressed nearly head to toe in Vanderbilt University branded clothing. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, her, quote, apparel and accessories bore the Vanderbilt University logo, including a top and leggings and hip band with zip pocket. She was also described then as likely between 15 and 25 years old. As law enforcement told News Channel 5 at the time of her discovery, there were no obvious signs of trauma or of any roadway accident, so her death was not a clear hit-and-run case. But her remains had been hidden along the side of the road, purposely obscured with branches and vegetation after her death. There was a presence of drugs in her system, which could indicate a possible overdose. There were no Vanderbilt students reported missing at that time, and the school and law enforcement have not found any former students in the system that match Vandy Jane Doe's profile. She was initially described as, quote, Black and or possibly Hispanic or Latino, but with genetic testing, that estimation has changed. In cooperation with Othram, Metro Nashville PD discovered that Vandy Jane Doe's ancestry was African American and Italian American. Since we first covered Vandy Jane Doe's case, a number of names have been released in association with her family tree, which we've provided on previous updates and on social media. We have shared some of those updates here, and we want to note that we know that she has relatives in Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, Texas, and Tennessee. Family names of interest from her tree are Mangarelli, Brunetti, Segretti, Alvatroni, Butler, and more. Detective Filter says they've narrowed down on 2 as particularly important. Andy says they've updated her likely age range after a new skeletal analysis from a consulting forensic anthropologist. We want to share that information with you because tips as to her possible identity continue to come in to Metro Nashville PD. They've been able to rule out a number of frequent possible matches, but are still searching for more information as to her identity.
All the work on Vandy Doe has primarily been with genealogists. We've received a few tips that either were unfounded or we weren't able to come to a conclusion on. Actually, I should say more than a few tips. We actually have gotten a lot of tips, and some of them have actually come from your listeners, in fact. Over the past year, the majority of the focus has been building out the African side of the tree and trying to find where the Italian and African lines connect. The 2 main surnames that I see consistently are still Mangarelli for the Italian side and Moore on the African side. As far as anthropological developments, after she was exhumed and an anthropologist did a thorough examination on her, the only significant change from the second examination was the age. They now believe she is between 21 and 35 years old instead of 15 to 25. Since Vandy Doe went public and we started putting her information out there, I mean, we've gotten tips on 80 different people. And most of the people have DNA uploaded into NDIS. So they would have gotten a hit off of it if it was Vandy Doe. And of course, trying to ask these labs to do direct comparisons all the time just isn't productive for the lab, especially because it would be very time consuming unless we have some other evidence that really points to her being Vandy Doe. But a lot of the tips that we get on people, it's mainly based off of the forensic rendering, and age is what most people are connecting with Vandy Doe. There are three in particular that we haven't been able to eliminate that have come in several times. Those three are Amanda Poole, Anjali Coleman, and Mia Hayes. Amanda Poole missing from Memphis, Anjali Coleman out of Fort Smith, Arkansas, and Mia Hayes out of New Orleans, Louisiana. Now, Mia Hayes, I'm waiting to get some updated information on her because I believe she is actually out in Los Angeles. She's supposedly been spotted out there, and there's been contact with her, but not with law enforcement. So I'm kind of hoping that law enforcement will have contact with her and be able to confirm that she is alive and take her out of the system. I can say that Mariah Ludwig, missing out of Gulfport, Mississippi, she has been excluded by DNA. Her information is still floating around out there, so every once in a while I do get her coming back. Also, Zanaya Hayes, who is missing out of New Orleans. There's a lot of information still out there, or some anyways, about her still being missing. But according to New Orleans PD, she was actually found back in December 2022. So she is eliminated. And then a Keosha Felix has come in several times. She's missing out of Lafayette Parish, Louisiana. But she does have a full profile in NDIS, so we should get a DNA hit. I also have gotten quite a few tips on Mercedes Tolliver, who's missing out of Prescott, Arkansas, and she has been eliminated by DNA as well. Aisha Degree is another one missing out of Cleveland, North Carolina. She's been excluded by DNA. I had been getting several tips on Samaria Greer, who was missing out of Memphis, and there's still a lot of info on her that's still on the internet that would indicate she's missing, but she has actually been recovered, so she is no longer missing. I'd gotten a lot of tips at one time on Tara Smart, too, that was, I think, missing out of St. Louis, but she has been recovered. She was recovered back in 2020. I've got two names here also that we've never, we haven't been able to confirm whether it's her or not. Based on their ages, probably not anymore, because one is Liz Marie Asensio. She was age 14, missing out of Springfield, Massachusetts. Springfield PD was supposed to be getting DNA from her mother to get uploaded in the CODIS, and that was quite a while ago. And then the other one was Tia Williams. She was age 17, missing from Romulus, Michigan. And the last I checked, there's been no DNA or dental or anything available for her. And then one other name that I know I got quite a bit initially, and I haven't received anything in a while now, is a Mercedes, and that's spelled Mercadeze, White. She was missing out of Memphis, Tennessee, and she has been located. But again, I think it's one of those where her information may still be floating around on the internet as a missing person.
If you have any information that could help identify Vandy Doe, please contact Detective Filter. We'll have that information in the show notes and at the end of the episode. Another case that we brought you in our Tennessee Doe season concerned the unidentified victims of the serial killer James Schaefer, who was tried and convicted for a number of crimes, including sexual assault and murder in Kentucky and Tennessee. He specifically targeted sex workers, though he also attacked a child in Kentucky. In the late 1980s, it was discovered that he'd kidnapped at least 3 Nashville area women and held them in his rental home. One woman managed to escape. 2 others, whom he told investigators he knew as Lil Bit and Sheila Cummings, were murdered and buried in the basement. Their remains were discovered by later tenants after Schaefer had moved. Though he was convicted, the women have remained unidentified. There was some information in the case file, such as the make and model of Sheila's car, and the physical descriptions of both women's clothing and jewelry, plus some information on where they may have stayed. But Metro Nashville police didn't have much to go on. That's because when we covered their case in 2023, the precise location of their remains was unknown. At that time, investigators were working to find their graves and any remaining evidence from their cases. Early this year, there was a major breakthrough.
So another detective in the cold case unit, Detective Andrew Davis, and I had been working on this case off and on for several years, trying to figure out where the bodies of these 2 women ended up. This included conversations with the medical examiner's office and their assistants searching their archives, our search of police archives, conversations with the University of Tennessee Anthropology Department, because that's where a lot of remains or bone cases from the 80s went to. And then we even talked to local anthropologists that were around at that time. Detective Davis even reached out to some retired medical examiners to inquire if they remembered what may have happened to the remains. What finally put us on the right path was Detective Davis was re-reviewing the original case file and found a 1-page anthropology report that was submitted by an anthropologist in Phoenix, Arizona. The report indicated the anthropologist had come to Nashville and examined the bones of the 2 females in February 1996. That told us these 2 women were probably stored at the Davidson County Medical Examiner's office until at least 1996. We had presumed the remains had either been buried or sent off to the University of Tennessee Anthropology in 1987 or 1988. We had checked indigent burial records from 1987 through 1990 and obviously didn't find them. Now knowing they were above ground at least until 1996, Detective Davis requested indigent burial records from 1996 through 2000, and through those records, it was discovered they were buried in the Bordeaux Cemetery in August 1996. Now knowing where they were buried, we were able to get a court order to have the remains exhumed and coordinate with the medical examiner's office, the funeral home that did the original burial, and the vault company, and have the 2 women brought back above ground. We did that on January 8th of this year. We are in the process of getting samples sent to the lab for CODIS entry, and if that does not give us a lead, then we'll submit the remains for FGG. One surprise we got from the exhumation was the discovery of the jewelry from both women. The jewelry had been buried with them, which was really strange to us because that is something that we would not do today. We thought since our evidence section had no record of the jewelry, that the jewelry had been disposed of since the case was adjudicated. So it was a pleasant surprise to find this jewelry, as it gives us another opportunity to get better pictures of the jewelry to put out publicly for identification purposes. And I've been talking with someone who does work with artifacts that may be able to clean up the jewelry for us for a better presentation. Another promising lead that we got in the case, which the timing of it couldn't have been any better, is on January 6th. This was 2 days before we were doing the scheduled exhumation. I received a phone call from a woman who believes the UHR known as Sheila Cummings may be her mother. She explained her mother, whose name was Sheila Cummings, was originally from Illinois and liked to travel. She drove a Ford LTD and was last known to be in Tennessee. everything she was saying was matching up with what we knew about her. So I obtained DNA from two daughters of Sheila Cummings, and we are in the process of getting those samples submitted to the lab as well. If all goes well, we may have one of the women identified in the next few months, and then we'll be able to focus our attention on identifying Little Bit. I've asked Carl Koppelman to get started on a forensic rendering of Little Bit, and that should be ready for release here in the next few weeks.
Detective Filter began working with Carl Koppelman after he volunteered to do forensic art for two of the other Doe cases that we featured on the season. We've discussed his work many times on the show before, and he's extensively interviewed in my book, Lay Them to Rest. Detective Filter also told us that the family of Sheila Cummings contacted Metro Nashville PD after seeing information online about the case. So, we have to stress again, sharing these stories is vital. Doe cases are circulated, and then the families of missing people actually have the chance of seeing them. Another case we covered was the death of a woman, then known as Highway 70 Jane Doe, who was discovered in November of 2020. She was found in an abandoned house in Nashville where unhoused individuals had gathered to use drugs. According to police reports, she was discovered on a mattress on an upper floor with unused Narcan near her body. She was a young woman, and she had a very distinctive tattoo, a semicolon stylized with a heart. Forensic art featuring her face and her tattoo were circulated through the Southeast, and forensic work began on her case soon after we aired our coverage. Late last year, she was identified. It turns out that her family had been searching for her for years.
So Highway 70 Jane Doe's case was solved based on a forensic rendering. In September 2023, I had the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation do a forensic rendering of the UHR that included the tattoo on her wrist. In October 2024, the family of Ashley Fuller contacted the Metro Police Department and the Davidson County Medical Examiner after seeing the forensic rendering online. We were able to obtain Ashley's dental records and confirm her identity that way. Her mother last saw Ashley in February 2019. Ashley had run away from home a lot as a juvenile, and a missing persons report was always made with the local police department. She lived outside of Nashville. However, after she turned 18, the local police department refused to take a missing persons report because of her history of running away. And now that she was a legal adult, she had the right to leave and not tell her mother where she was. The mother did have phone contact with her a few times after February 2019, and she last spoke to her on the phone in August of 2020. Ashley had gone to live with a cousin, but left her cousin's house in March of 2020. During the time between leaving her cousin's house and being found deceased, she primarily was living on the streets. The last person that saw her was a friend. The friend dropped her off at the city bus station in downtown Nashville. At the bus station, she met a man and a woman who were drug addicts and lived on the street. Now, Ashley was known to use marijuana in the past, but never anything harder. However, when I was interviewing some of her street acquaintances, they told me that Ashley would try anything to see if she liked it or not, which kind of opened the door to her experimenting with different drugs. The two people she met invited her to come stay at an abandoned house in West Nashville, which she accepted their invitation and stayed with them. This would have been the Monday before Thanksgiving 2020. The detective that initially worked the death investigation had interviewed a drug addict that had been buying heroin from an individual at this abandoned house. This drug addict gave him the name of a man and a woman that had been staying at the house and said a young female named Ashley was with them on Tuesday. Ashley appeared to be fine, and he did not perceive anything being wrong. This was on Tuesday of that same week. On Thursday, Thanksgiving Day, He went to the house to see if he could get some heroin to last him through the weekend. When he met with the man at the house, Ashley and the other woman were both passed out on the floor. He said Ashley looked sick and inquired if she was all right. The man checked her and said that she was okay, and he made his purchase and left. That night, he saw the police in an ambulance at the house, which would have been when Ashley was found deceased. Obviously, the mother was devastated by the news of how her daughter died. I tried to find some answers for her to help her understand better what happened. Unfortunately, the only people that could tell me exactly what happened were the man and woman she was staying with, and both of them had died from intravenous drug use related issues prior to Ashley being identified.
That's a recurring theme in so many of the identifications that we encounter. Some questions are answered, but not nearly enough of them. Not for the family of the victims who've been looking for so long. Ashley's family are still searching for more information. So if you knew Ashley at the time that she was in Nashville, please reach out to Detective Filter. Her mother deserves more.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip. When it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
When we produced our season on the Tennessee Doe cases, we discussed cases that received the least media attention, even among the unidentified. This includes does who are suspected to have been members of the unhoused community. Insecure housing and frequent moves can mean additional issues in investigation, too. Missing persons reports may not have been filed, and families have often lost touch. But thanks to FIGG and funding for that work, Metro Nashville PD has been able to identify a number of the victims that we featured in 2023. One of those cases was a victim formerly known as Charlotte Pike John Doe, who was discovered in a wooded area of Nashville in 2016. Here's some of the information we gave you on his case the first time we covered it. Charlotte Pike John Doe was found near an encampment, a small one that the Tennessean described as, quote, one tent behind a copse of trees near some railroad tracks. Charlotte Pike John Doe may have resided there, but authorities couldn't be sure. Inside the tent, which police records estimate was about 30 yards from where the victim was found, were medical release papers from St. Thomas Midtown Hospital. Eventually, those records were connected to another living individual. But Charlotte Pike John Doe, he had been injured, and seriously. It was unclear how long before his death that the trauma occurred, but the injury seemed similar to those a person might experience after a significant car crash or similar accident. How he came to be found in the encampment of another individual, it remained a mystery, as did the exact source of his injuries. When we last spoke with Detective Filter about this case, Metro Nashville was pursuing FIGG and investigating the medical records that had been found at the scene. There had been initial leads, but the investigation had become more complex when genealogy pointed Metro Nashville toward an individual who could not be Charlotte Pike John Doe.
Charlotte Pike John Doe was eventually identified through FGG. Originally, the genealogist believed the UHR to be an individual from Kentucky. I contacted the family, and they swore up and down he was still alive. I contacted the guy's son, and he claimed to have spoken to his father a month ago. Eventually, the guy in question called the cold case office to tell us he was alive. I wasn't able to get much more information as this guy had a very long criminal history and was not a fan of law enforcement. In fact, it was really surprising he even called us to tell us that he was alive. But this guy had been in a serious car accident and ended up with a plethora of broken bones and walked with a cane, just like Charlotte Pike John Doe. So it was almost just amazing that there's two people out there that are this close, then that they come up, even the genealogists come up with a possible person that has very similar injuries. But with no way to prove anything different, I had to tell the genealogists just to keep digging. After collecting some more reference samples from other people to continue building the tree, in December 2023, I got a report that the UHR was believed to be Barclay Jones. Barclay Jones had a brother that lived in South Nashville named Terry Lee Jones. I went to Terry's house and he confirmed that he had a brother named Barclay who he had not seen in several years. He went on to explain Barclay was an alcoholic and he tried to help him at one time by letting him live with him. The only stipulation was he could not drink and he had to find some type of job. He said Barclay did all right for about 3 weeks until he got a phone call one evening to come get his brother from a bar a few miles down the road. He said he brought his brother home and then told him the next day he needed to find another place to live. And that was the last time he ever saw or spoke to his brother. Terry said that their parents were both dead and they had no other family that he was aware of anyways. No cousins, no uncles, aunts, nothing. It was just him and his brother. Terry provided a reference sample. And on Friday, February 2nd, 2024, I received confirmation that Charlotte Pike John Doe was Barclay Jones. I phoned Terry but didn't get an answer, and so I left him a voicemail message asking him to call me.
Soon after, Detective Filter got the news that Terry had passed away before he got confirmation that his brother had been identified.
Sadly, I think Terry knew that the UHR was going to be his brother Barclay. I don't think he needed to hear confirmation on that. But Barclay's manner of death is still undetermined. He had fresh bone fractures to the left radius, right rib 9, right rib 12, and sacrum, according to the anthropologist. But at the same time, they said they were not clearly perimortem. Barclay was also found in another man's camp that was abandoned with new clothing and personal documents left behind. This man was originally believed to be the UHR until he was located alive and well by the original case detective. I intended to interview this man again because it did not appear he was ever really interviewed, and I wanted to know why a dead person was in his camp and he left brand new clothing and personal documents behind to never retrieve them. To me, that was just very suspicious. Unfortunately, this man is now deceased, so I'll never be able to get those answers to the questions. As it stands now, there are no viable leads in the case, and the case is inactive.
In the same episode, we discussed the recovery of skeletal remains from Browns Creek in Nashville, also in 2016. Though there were some identifying cards found at the scene, a Red Roof Inn card and an EBT card, Metro Nashville were unable to use them to successfully identify the decedent whose remains were recovered. However, Othram Labs successfully developed a DNA profile for Browns Creek John Doe, and he was identified via FIGG in 2024. What can you tell us about the resolution of the case of Browns Creek John Doe?
Brown Creek John Doe was identified through FGG as Kinlock Wilkinson Jr. Kinlock had mental health issues and traveled around a lot, usually taking a Greyhound bus. He typically would live in homeless shelters or homeless camps or a motel if he had the money. The family said he would stop home and visit just unexpectedly, and he would usually stay around for 2 or 3 days and then be gone for 2 or 3 years. Kinlock would normally call about once a month. The last time the family talked to him, he said he was going to Nashville, and that was in early 2016. So I was able to find out he was in Florida in early 2016. The first evidence I could find of him being in Nashville was in June 2016 when he was written a citation with two other homeless men living under an interstate overpass. His family said he normally traveled with a guitar. A guitar was not found anywhere in the vicinity of his body. I checked pawn records, and Kinloch had pawned a lot of guitars over the years. The last guitar he pawned was 6 days before he got the citation under the bridge. So it's possible he didn't have a guitar at the time of his death. I attempted to find the two men that were issued citations with him to see if they could tell me any more about Kinloch's time in Nashville. One of the men was deceased. The other man I couldn't find, and very little information was found on him. It's possible he's deceased as well. This case is currently inactive with a cause and manner of death as undetermined.
That's been a theme in many of the cases Detective Filter has been working on. When a victim is identified, decades later, the possible witnesses, or in some cases, the persons of interest, they're found to be deceased. It's a frustrating reality in cold casework, and for families who want the whole story beyond the identification of their loved one. The how and the why. We also discussed the case of a decedent who came to be known as Exit 52 John Doe. In 2018, authorities discovered the remains of a man near Exit 52 in Nashville in what seemed to be a collapsed tent constructed of tarps, blankets, and a sleeping bag. Though there were some identifying documents, including a social security card found at the scene, those items, they did not lead Metro Nashville PD to an identity for the decedent. Forensic examination indicated that the individual had likely died years before, and there were no clear signs of trauma. His case remained cold for years, until FIGG conducted by Othram led to an identification in 2024.
Exit 52 John Doe was identified through FGG as Stephen Allen Yance. He had two brothers that provided reference samples for confirmation. According to the brothers, Stephen had mental health problems and lived homeless his entire adult life. They said they would hear from him every few years, but never really knew where he was. Since they had not heard from him in several years, they assumed he was dead. Because Stephen moved around a lot, they never knew where to start looking for him. Stephen was not known to be a substance abuser. The cause and manner of death is undetermined, and the case is currently inactive. Based on information known about Stephen, we believe that he likely died of natural causes in his sleep.
Because Stephen Yance's family had not been in contact with him and did not consider him missing, there was no report filed. Without genetic genealogy, it's unlikely that he would have ever been identified, or that his brothers would have gotten answers. We have a final update regarding a case involving the unhoused community in Nashville, a victim formerly known as 8th Avenue or Library John Doe. In 1993, Metro Nashville received an emergency call reporting that an individual had fallen from a high wall near Nashville's Old Main Branch Library. As reported in our episode, people tended to congregate in that area since there was both shade and seating, but no one knew that there was someone up on the higher portion of the building. It was a pedestrian walkway that was above the parking lot. Witnesses were below, and it was unclear whether they saw the victim fall or whether they came upon him afterward. He was still alive when emergency services arrived, but he passed away at Vanderbilt Hospital. The victim carried no identification. As he was unconscious, medical staff could not ask him any questions. And when law enforcement spoke with the witnesses at the scene, they said they were unfamiliar with the victim. So his case remained cold for 30 years, until FIGG opened the path to resolution.
Library John Doe was identified as Donald Verhalen. Othram Lab had identified Donald Verhalen as the possible UHR through FGG. I did some research on Donald and found he had an arrest history. I contacted Metro Police Department Latent Lab, and they found the latent prints that were taken during autopsy. I requested they be compared with Donald's prints under his FBI number, and they were a match.
Donald Verhalen had lost contact with his family sometime in the 1980s. They last knew him to be living in Tennessee, though not as far as we know in Nashville. He was originally from Wisconsin, and he was 56 years old when he died. During our season, we also discussed the difficulty of arranging public attention for cases where only partial remains are recovered, meaning only a few bones. It can be hard for the public to connect unidentified remains to the people that they were on an emotional level, because their families are unable to advocate for them in the media. When someone is forcibly separated from their identity, their story, what humanizes them and attracts advocacy, that's taken away too. That's one of the reasons that we push so hard for coverage of Doe cases, and to help others learn how to cover unidentified persons cases too. In our series, we featured a number of victims whose partial remains were recovered in Nashville, including a decedent then known as Pecan Valley John Doe. His partial remains, a skull, were discovered in 2010 by a hunter off Pecan Valley Road near Highway 12 in Nashville. In 2024, testing connected Pecan Valley John Doe to a decades-old case, a missing Tennessee State University student, last seen in 1998. That student, Marcus Rutledge, was only 23 years old when he disappeared.
So, Pecan Valley Doe was identified through CODIS as Marcus Rutledge. Marcus Rutledge was reported missing in Nashville in 1998. And just as a note, to date, I've identified 9 UHRs in Nashville, and this was the first one that the person had an active missing persons report. In 2024, I met with the medical examiner's office and reviewed all the anthro cases they had that had not had samples submitted for CODIS entry. There were 9 Davidson County cases, and they were sent to a private lab that is contracted with the Metro Nashville Police Lab. Pecan Valley Doe was one of the cases submitted. The hit was made off the profile uploaded of his daughter's DNA. The only part found was the skull. This was found by a hunter, and it was turned over to police in 2010. The skull was found about 40 or 50 yards off Pecan Valley Road near a creek. From what I learned, no search of the area was ever done for additional bones. I am currently working on getting permission from the landowner to search the area the skull was found for any additional remains or evidence. I did drive out to the location just to see what it looked like, and the spot is an ideal body dump location. The side of the road the skull was found on had a very steep ditch that tapered off toward a creek. It would have been very easy to throw a body in the ditch and no one would know it was there unless you happened to be walking on that side of the road or walking through the woods. And this is a very desolate country road, and the area there was basically just woods. There were a couple houses nearby, but not within sight of where this location is. And I imagine over the 10 plus years, the body was there. Scavengers had drug parts of it all over the place. Foul play is suspected in Marcus Rutledge's case, and his case has been investigated as a likely homicide from the beginning.
Do you have any leads on suspects, or is that something you can't speak to right now?
I don't have any concrete suspects per se. I guess persons of interest, I would say. But, most of it is going back to the missing persons case. And these are guys that had been looked at back in 1998, 1999, and no connection was made by detectives back then. But I mean, at this point, that's all I've got to work with.
In February of 2025, Marcus Rutledge's father, David, shared a statement with Dateline NBC. He wrote, quote, "Our family would like to express our deepest appreciation to those who have been so helpful to us in trying to find Marcus." Dateline noted that, quote, "He said they are grateful to the news media and podcast, as well as the Nashville Police Cold Case Division." And Mr. Rutledge continued, quote, "Your efforts have brought us another step closer to closure. Marcus, we will forever cherish the memories." Detective Filter is actively pursuing leads in Marcus Rutledge's suspected homicide. If you have any information, please reach out. Again, you can find that information in our show notes or at the end of the episode. While we are glad to bring you updates in these cases, we recognize that resolution for the families of the victims is not closure or all the answers that they need. There will always be questions that have not been answered. So, if there is anything that you know that can provide them with more, even for the victims who have already been identified, please do not hesitate to reach out. You can contact us and we will get you in touch with Metro Nashville PD, or you can reach out directly to Detective Filter. Most of all, we hope that this demonstrates that sharing Doe cases and keeping them in the public eye is vital. It aids in funding and in the chance that families will see a news story or a post or hear a podcast and recognize their loved one. The smallest detail can truly close a cold case. If you have any information regarding the open Metro Nashville PD cases that we've mentioned, please contact Detective Filter at 615-862-7803. You can also call Nashville Crime Stoppers at 615-74-CRIME or 7463. Callers remain anonymous and may qualify for a cash reward. Next week, we will be re-releasing an episode on a Georgia cold homicide case at the request of the family in hopes of encouraging more media attention. And then we'll be back in May with our next season. Before we sign off, just a little housekeeping. We have an update to share about our Apple Premium subscription. Many of you know that between the few of us who work on The Fall Line, we actually make 2 podcasts, The Fall Line and One Strange Thing. Because of some changes on the business side, we're now going to offer our subscriptions to both shows under a single channel, sort of like you see for companies like Tenderfoot or Wondery or Slate. It won't affect your subscriptions to The Fall Line's early ad-free episodes if you're already subscribed, so no worries there. But things on the app might look a little different. If you're listening on Patreon, don't worry, nothing will change there. And the proceeds from the Fall Line subscriptions everywhere, they'll still go toward our therapy fund. If you haven't heard of One Strange Thing before this announcement, please do check it out. It's a much lighter show where we look at possible paranormal mysteries that we uncover in America's news archives. If you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch. If you know of a case that should be covered on the Fall Line, there's a link to our case submission form in the show notes. Thank you for listening. Fall Line is an independent podcast. We appreciate listener support. It allows us to do research, obtain FOIA, pay our content advisors, and support and donate to the causes we care about. If you try out the products we advertise, please use our sponsor codes. It really helps. And please take a moment to rate and review our show in your podcast app of choice. If you listen on Apple Podcast, please be sure to check your subscription to make sure that you're set for automatic downloads so that you don't miss an episode. My book, Lay Them to Rest, is out everywhere now. Find out more through the link in our show notes. The Fall Line is written, hosted, and researched by Laurah Norton, with additional research assistance by Melissa Gold. Interviews by Brooke Hargrove, produced, engineered, and scored by Maura Curry. Content advisement by Vic Kennedy and Brandy C. Williams. Special thanks to Liz Lipka.